I want to give you 3 questions today. Not the questions the board will ask you when you go for the CEO role. Not the questions a headhunter will ask you. Those questions have rehearsed answers and most executives are well prepared for them. Well, they should be anyway. These are 3 different questions. The ones that most executives have never actually sat with. And in my experience, the answers or the absence of answers tell you more about genuine readiness than anything on a resume. So question 1, who are you when nobody is watching the result? Most executives know exactly who they are when they're performing. When the quarter's good, when the team is firing, when the strategy is working and the numbers are moving in the right direction. That version of themselves is well practiced. They've been building it for 20 years. The CEO role doesn't test that version. What it tests, what it will inevitably test, is who you are when the conditions strip that away. When the quarter is bad and you can't explain why. When the strategy you staked your reputation on is clearly not working. When the board is watching and nothing you've prepared is landing the way you expected. I've sat in that room. I've watched executives in that room. And what I can tell you is that person who shows up in that moment is often someone their colleagues haven't seen before. Not because they're dishonest, but because that version of themselves, the one that emerges under genuine, sustained pressure, has never been examined, never been developed, and never been made conscious. The executives who handle those moments well have one thing in common. They know who they are underneath the performance, not just in theory. They've actually done the work of looking at it. The ones who struggle have built everything on the external picture. And when the external picture stops holding, there's nothing underneath to fall back on. Who are you when nobody is watching the result? If you don't know the answer to that question, the role will find it out for you in a room where you would have preferred it not to. So question 2. Do the people around you tell you the truth? Not the version of truth that's been smoothed for your consumption, not the update that's been prepared with an eye to how you receive it, the actual version. What is actually happening in the organization? Most senior executives think the answer is yes. Most of them are wrong. Here is the pattern I see consistently. The more senior you become, the more authority you carry, the more consequences attached to your reactions, the less likely people are to tell you what is actually happening. Not because they're dishonest, because they've learned, consciously or not, what you want to hear. They've noticed what happens when you receive news badly. They've seen what gets rewarded and what doesn't, and they've adjusted their communication accordingly. By the time an executive reaches CEO level, the information reaching them has often been filtered through 4 or 5 layers of that adjustment. What they receive is not the truth, it's a version of the truth that has been shaped to land well. The cost of that is enormous, because the CEO role requires you to make decisions based on reality. If the reality you're working from has been curated, your decisions are built on a foundation that isn't solid. I've seen this play out in turnaround situations. The problem the board finally surfaces has been visible at operational level for 18 months. Everyone knew, nobody told the CEO. Not because they were protecting something, because the culture around that CEO had made honesty feel costly. So do the people around you tell you the truth? Can you name the 2 or 3 people who will tell you something you generally don't want to hear? And does that actually happen? If you can't name them, that's the work, before the role, not during it. So question 3. What decisions are you avoiding right now? There is almost always one. I've never worked with a senior executive who didn't have one when we got honest about it. A conversation that hasn't been had. A person who needs to go but hasn't. A strategy that isn't working but hasn't been called yet. A structural problem that everyone can see but nobody has moved on. The reasons for the deferral feel legitimate when the timing isn't right, more information is needed, you don't need to destabilize the team. There's a big quarter coming up and now isn't the moment. I understand those reasons. I've used them myself. But underneath most of them is something simpler. The decision is uncomfortable. It will create friction, might be wrong, and uncomfortable decisions have a natural human tendency to not get made until the cost of not making them becomes higher than the cost of making them. In a CEO role, that moment often arrives in a crisis. The conversation that should have happened 12 months ago becomes unavoidable. The person who should have gone 6 months ago is now causing real damage. The strategy that needed to be changed in quarter one is now a problem the board is asking hard questions about. The executives I most respect are the ones who have trained themselves to make the hard call before it becomes the only call, who have built enough self-awareness to recognize when they're deferring and enough conviction to move away. That is learnable capacity, but it requires practice. It requires having done it enough times in smaller situations that when the significant one arrives, the muscle is there. So what decisions are you avoiding right now? Not the one you've rationalized away, the one that sits quietly in the background of your thinking and doesn't quite go away. So those are the three questions. Who are you when nobody is watching the result? Do the people around you tell you the truth? And what decision are you avoiding right now? You don't need to have perfect answers. The fact that you're sitting with them seriously already puts you ahead of most. But if you hadn't asked them, if they've never been the subject of real reflection, then there's a gap between your external readiness and your actual readiness. And the CEO role will eventually find that gap. The work I do is about closing it before the role requires it of you. So if this is landing, if any part of it is naming something you've been circling, there's a link below. Let's have a 30-minute chat, no pitch, just an honest conversation about where you are. I'm Stevenson. This is Deep Leadership. Let's get to work.